Mending Fractured Bonds, Part 5. The school's annual festival was in full swing, the grounds buzzing with activity as students showcased their talents and hosted stalls. Brent found himself wandering aimlessly through the crowd, his thoughts consumed by Eric. The last conversation that had played on a loop in his mind. Sorry isn't enough, Brent. Not this time. His chest ached with the weight of everything left unsaid. He knew he couldn't keep waiting. If he wanted to make things right, he had to face Eric one last time. He spotted him near the art exhibit, standing alone with his arms crossed. The sunlight highlighted Eric's sharp features, and Brent couldn't help but notice the weariness in his expression. Summoning his courage, Brent approached. "Eric," he said, his voice firm despite the nervous flutter in his chest. Eric turned, his piercing blue eyes meeting Brent's. "What do you want?" "I need to talk to you," Brent said. "Please. Just give me 5 minutes." Eric hesitated, then nodded curtly. "Fine." They found a quiet corner behind the main building, away from prying eyes. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was heavy, filled with unspoken words. "I've been thinking about what you said," Brent began, his voice trembling slightly. "And you're right. Sorry isn't enough. But I need you to know it's not just about that night." Eric's expression softened, but his gaze remained guarded. "What do you mean?" Brent took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. "That night. What we did to you, it was unforgivable. But what hurts me the most is that I didn't fight to make things right after. When you ran from that rooftop, I should have come after you. I should have told you how much you meant to me. But I didn't. I was ashamed. And I was scared." Eric's brows furrowed, confusion flickering across his face. "Scared of what?" "Of my feelings," Brent admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "That night, when you said you loved me, it shook me. I didn't know how to handle it. I needed time to figure out what I really felt, but by the time I tried to see you again, you were already gone." Eric's jaw tightened, and his eyes glistened with unshed tears. "You left me, Brent. After everything we went through, you just disappeared. I waited for you. Weeks passed, and I kept hoping you'd show up. But you didn't." Brent's heart ached at the pain in Eric's voice. "I did see you. From afar," he confessed. "I saw you walking home one day, but I couldn't bring myself to face you." Eric laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "And so you decided it was better to vanish completely?" "I thought it would be easier for you if I stayed away," Brent said, his voice cracking. "But it wasn't easier for me. Every day, I regretted not reaching out. I tried calling you after I found out you'd moved, but you never answered." Eric looked down, his hands clenched at his sides. "I changed my number. I didn't want to hear from anyone. I didn't think you'd even try." "I did," Brent said softly. "And I never stopped thinking about you. I missed you every single day." Eric's eyes finally met Brent's, and for the first time, there was no anger, just raw vulnerability. "When I said an apology wasn't enough, I didn't just mean for that night. I meant for leaving me. For making me feel like I didn't matter to you," Eric confessed. Brent stepped closer, his voice filled with emotion. "You mattered to me, Eric. You always did. And I was an idiot for making you think otherwise. I'm so sorry. For everything." Eric's breath hitched, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Then, as if pulled by an invisible force, Eric closed the distance between them. "You really hurt me, Brent," Eric whispered, his voice trembling. "But I never stopped caring about you." Brent's heart soared, and he reached out, his hand brushing against Eric's. "I care about you too. More than I can put into words." The confession hung in the air, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. Brent's hazel eyes searched Eric's face, hoping for a sign that he hadn't ruined this moment. Eric's hand tightened around his, and Brent felt a surge of hope. "You mean that?" Eric asked softly, his voice tinged with both doubt and longing. "I do," Brent said without hesitation. "Eric, you're the most important person in my life. I was too much of a coward to admit it back then, but not anymore." Eric looked away, his cheeks flushed. "You have no idea how long I've waited to hear you say that." Brent stepped closer, their faces inches apart. "Then let me say it again. I care about you, Eric. And I'm not going to run this time. I'm here. For as long as you'll have me." Eric's lips parted, but no words came out. Instead, he leaned in, closing the gap between them. Their lips met in a tender, hesitant kiss that quickly deepened as years of longing and unspoken emotions poured out. When they finally pulled apart, Eric's eyes were shimmering with unshed tears. "I hate how much I still care about you." Brent chuckled softly, his forehead resting against Eric's. Then hate me a little longer. Just don't push me away. Eric let out a shaky laugh, his arms wrapping around Brent's waist. I think I'm done pushing. Brent and Eric spent more time together, rediscovering the friendship they once had while exploring the new feelings between them. Their classmates noticed the change, and though there were whispers, neither of them cared. One afternoon, they sat under the old oak tree on the school grounds, the sunlight filtering through the leaves. Brent leaned back against the trunk, his hand resting on Eric's. I still have a lot to make up for, Brent said, his voice quiet but determined. Eric smiled faintly, his thumb brushing against Brent's knuckles. You're doing a pretty good job so far. Brent turned to look at him, his hazel eyes filled with sincerity. I won't let you down again, Eric. I promise. Eric's smile widened, and he leaned in, pressing a soft kiss to Brent's cheek. I'm holding you to that. As the sun began to set, casting a warm golden glow over the school grounds, Brent felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. He and Eric still had a long way to go, but for the first time, he felt like they were on the right path, together.